My father-in-law, Emmett, called my artisanal jam company little hobby. He said it at every family dinner, his voice a smooth, deep rumble of condescension that filled the dining room and silenced all other conversation. He'd lift his wine glass, a heavy crystal thing that looked like a weapon in his large hand, and offer a toast to Josie and her little hobby. It was always followed by a wink in my direction, a gesture that was meant to seem avuncular and charming, but felt like a pat on the head of a child. "It's a cute distraction," he'd tell my husband, Mark, loud enough for me to hear. "Good for her to have something to do before the babies come." My name is Josie, and for years I smiled through those toasts. I'd feel a quiet heat flush up my neck, but I would just nod and thank him because that's what you did with Emmett. He was a self-made tycoon, a man who had built a sprawling empire of holding companies and acquisitions from nothing but grit and what he called killer instinct. He saw the world as a collection of assets to be leveraged or liabilities to be cut. There was no in-between, and for a long time I was just a social accessory to his son, filed away in a category so insignificant it didn't even warrant a label. So when my brand, Josie's Pantry, started getting national press, the shift was seismic. It started with a small feature in a food blogger's holiday gift guide, which led to a mention in a major online magazine, and then a full-page spread in a Sunday supplement. Suddenly, my little hobby had a name people recognized. At our next family dinner, the toast changed. Emmett stood up, his eyes holding mine with a new, unnerving intensity. He said, to Josie, a rising star, "It's time I started mentoring her." He didn't offer, he declared it. And because I still operated under the illusion that this was a family, I accepted. I thought, maybe, this was his way of finally seeing me, of finally offering respect. If you're watching this, maybe you've been in that position, hoping that the person who consistently underestimates you will finally have that light bulb moment. You tell yourself it's worth the wait. It helps to know I'm not screaming into the void here, so let me know in the comments if you've ever felt that. Because for a little while, I truly believed his validation was a prize worth winning. His mentorship, however, wasn't about teaching, it was about reconnaissance. He'd invite me to his cavernous, wood-paneled office, a place that smelled of old money and smug satisfaction. He'd pore over my financials, my supplier lists, my marketing strategies. He'd nod slowly, making notes on a yellow legal pad. He'd say things like, "Impressive, very scalable, but you're thinking too small, Josie. You're running a lemonade stand. I'm thinking about global distribution." I was so flattered by the attention, so desperate for his approval, that I didn't see the predator behind the platitudes. The inciting incident, the moment the entire fragile illusion shattered, didn't happen in his office. It happened on my own stupid IKEA desk in my small home office, late on a Tuesday night. He had sent over a file, a thick PDF with the subject line, "Drafting a formal partnership structure for growth." He'd told me it was just some standard paperwork to protect me as we moved forward, something to show potential investors. He said, "Don't worry about the legalese, Josie. That's my department. Just sign where I've marked." But he didn't know about my grandfather. My grandfather, William, was a patent lawyer, a quiet, meticulous man, who taught me to read contracts before I could properly ride a bike. He'd make a game of it, pointing out weasel words and loopholes in cereal box promotions and toy advertisements. He'd say, "The big print gives, Josie, but the small print takes away." It was a lesson he'd drilled into me my entire life. His voice was a permanent echo in my head, so I read the small print. My heart started a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs as I scrolled through pages of dense legal jargon. It wasn't a partnership agreement. It was a transfer of intellectual property. Tucked away in Section 7, subsection B, was a clause that granted Emmett's primary holding company, E Corp, the exclusive, irrevocable, and global license to manufacture, distribute, and franchise any and all recipes and branding associated with Josie's Pantry. In exchange, I would receive a 1% royalty and a title as a brand ambassador. He wasn't mentoring me. He was gutting my company, taking the brand and the recipes I had bled for, and leaving me with an empty title and pocket change. He was turning me into a mascot for my own life's work. He assumed I was too naive, too much of a girl playing with her little hobby, to ever understand the dagger he had so politely asked me to fall on. He was wrong. The foundation of his plan was built on the assumption of my ignorance, and that was a fatal miscalculation. That night, sitting in the blue glow of my monitor, the warmth of wanting his approval went ice cold. It was replaced by a clarity so sharp, it felt like a shard of glass in my gut. This wasn't a negotiation, this was war. The drive home from his office that day, before I'd even seen the contract, felt different. I remember the weight of the air, the way the late afternoon sun cast long, distorted shadows across the highway. I was still floating on the fumes of his praise. He'd spent 2 hours outlining a future for my brand that was bigger and brighter than I had ever dared to imagine. He spoke of bottling plants in Europe, of Josie's Pantry becoming a household name from Sydney to Seattle. He used words like synergy and vertical integration, corporate poetry that was both intoxicating and utterly meaningless. He made me feel like I was on the cusp of the big leagues, that my little jam company was about to become a real grown-up business, all because of him, all because he, the great Emmett, had deigned to take an interest. I sat in traffic, my hands loose on the steering wheel, replaying his words. I felt a surge of gratitude so profound it almost made me dizzy. I was finally being taken seriously. The years of quiet dismissal, the belittling comments, the patient smiles I had offered in return, they were all about to pay off. I was going to prove to him, to the whole family, that my passion was more than just a hobby. I was going to make him proud. That feeling, that dangerous, intoxicating hope, lasted for approximately 4 hours. It evaporated the second I opened that PDF. When the realization hit me, it wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a slow, creeping cold that started in my fingertips and spread through my veins until my entire body felt like it was encased in ice. I sat there, staring at the screen, reading the clause over and over again. The words blurred, then sharpened with sickening clarity. Irrevocable, global license, 1% royalty. He wasn't lifting me up. He was preparing to stand on my shoulders to reach a higher shelf. My husband, Mark, came into the office. He saw the look on my face, and his own easy smile faltered. "What's wrong, Joe? You look like you've seen a ghost." I couldn't speak. I just pointed at the screen. He leaned over my shoulder, his familiar scent of soap and aftershave suddenly feeling foreign and suffocating. He read the paragraph, his brow furrowed in concentration. He read it again, then he straightened up and let out a short, nervous laugh. He said, "Honey, you must be reading this wrong. Dad wouldn't do that. It's probably just boilerplate stuff. His lawyers are probably just being aggressive." And that was the moment the betrayal became complete. It wasn't just Emmett. It was the system he had built around him, a system of denial and willful blindness that enabled his behavior. Mark wasn't evil. He was just a product of that system, a son so conditioned by his father's power that he couldn't conceive of it being used against his own wife. He saw a misunderstanding. I saw a declaration of war. In that moment, I had never felt more alone. The man who was supposed to be my partner, my defender, was asking me to doubt my own eyes, to doubt the lessons my grandfather had spent a lifetime teaching me. He wanted me to believe it was all a mistake, because the alternative that his father was a ruthless predator was too uncomfortable for him to confront. I didn't fight with him. I didn't have the energy. The cold inside me had burned away all the heat. I just closed the laptop and said, "You're probably right. I'm just tired." I went to bed and lay there in the dark, my back to him, my eyes wide open, staring at the shifting shadows on the ceiling. The silence in the room was immense, a hollow space where trust used to be. My mind started to spool backwards, replaying every condescending remark, every dismissive gesture from Emmett over the years, but now they were cast in a new, sinister light. I remembered the very first time I met him, at a sprawling family barbecue at their estate. I had been so nervous. Mark had told me his father was a force of nature, a man you had to earn respect from. I had baked a batch of my signature strawberry and balsamic jam, bringing it as a hostess gift. I presented it to him, my hands trembling slightly. He took the jar, glanced at the handwritten label, and handed it to his housekeeper without a word. Later, I saw it on a back counter, unopened. He never mentioned it. At the time, I thought I had failed some unspoken test. Now I knew. He hadn't even seen me. I remembered a Christmas dinner, 2 years into my marriage. I just secured my first small distribution deal with a local chain of gourmet shops. I was bursting with pride. When it was my turn to share my news for the year, I explained the deal, my voice full of excitement. Emmett had listened with a look of pained boredom. When I finished, he'd turned to the table and announced, "That's nice, dear." In other news, E-Corp just finalized the acquisition of a logistics firm in Belgium. The entire family had erupted in applause, my small victory completely erased, buried under the weight of his global empire. He had a unique talent for making you feel small, for making your accomplishments feel like children's drawings next to a masterpiece. And the mentorship sessions, I cringed in the darkness, thinking about how naive I'd been. I had walked into the lion's den and called it a classroom. I'd handed him my playbook, page by page. I had detailed my 5-year plan, my dream of creating a line of savory jams, my research into organic sourcing. He had absorbed it all with a hungry stillness, like a python watching a rabbit. He wasn't just planning to steal my company. He was planning to steal my future. My thoughts drifted further back, to a safer place. My grandfather's office. It was in the attic of his old Victorian house, a room that smelled of aging paper, leather-bound books, and pipe tobacco. I used to spend hours up there as a little girl, sitting on a worn leather armchair while he worked. He never shooed me away. He'd let me draw with his fountain pens and build towers out of expired law books. He was the one who gave my first business a name. I was 6 and had a lemonade stand. He had helped me paint a sign that said, "Josie's Just Desserts." He told me that a good name was the beginning of a good story. One afternoon, I had drawn a picture of a fantastical flying machine. I was so proud of it. I showed it to him, explaining how all the gears and wings worked. He had taken it very seriously. He'd held it up to the light, studying it like a real blueprint. Then he'd pulled out a piece of paper and a special pen and drawn a big, fancy sick with a circle around it at the bottom of my drawing. He told me it was a copyright symbol. He said, "This idea, Josie, this drawing, it came from your brain. That makes it yours. It's your property. Just like this house is my property, and the law protects it. It's a shield to stop people from taking what's yours without asking. Never let anyone take what's yours." Lying in my bed, the memory of his voice, calm and certain, was a lifeline in the cold darkness. He had given me the shield. All these years, I had carried it without even knowing. The condescension, the belittling, the constant erosion of my confidence. It had all been designed to make me forget I even had a shield, to make me believe I was unarmed. The cold in my bones began to shift. It wasn't the passive cold of shock anymore. It was the hard, dense cold of forged steel. The despair wasn't just vanishing, it was transmuting into something else. Resolve. A quiet, unbending, and absolute resolve. I looked at the man sleeping beside me, my husband, who had so easily dismissed my fear, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me even more than the betrayal itself, that I was going to have to do this alone. It wasn't about revenge. I kept telling myself that, over and over again, a mantra against the anger that was threatening to boil over. It wasn't about revenge. It was about survival. It was about honoring the one man who had always seen me as the architect of my own ideas, not just a caretaker of a cute little hobby. Emmett had made a critical error. He thought he was dealing with his son's wife. He was about to find out he was dealing with William's granddaughter. The plan didn't come to me in a flash of cinematic inspiration. It was built slowly, methodically, in the dead of night, fueled by stale coffee and a righteous anger so pure it felt like a source of energy. For years I had operated on the assumption that I had to earn my place at Emmett's table. That night, I decided to build my own table, and then I was going to flip his for good measure. My grandfather, William, had been a creature of habit and foresight. When he passed away, he left me his entire legal library. Mark had thought it was a sentimental but useless inheritance. He'd suggested we donate the heavy, musty books. I had refused. I stored them in our basement, dozens of boxes of them, a silent testament to a man who believed in the power of the written word. Now, they were my arsenal. I started pulling them out, one by one. I wasn't looking for a specific statute. I was looking for a mindset, a way of thinking. I was trying to channel his meticulous, strategic brain. Emmett saw the world in terms of brute force and hostile takeovers. My grandfather saw it as a complex latticework of rules, where the person who understood the structure held the true power. I spent hours reading about intellectual property. I learned the nuanced dance between trademarks, copyrights, and trade secrets. This is where I saw Emmett's first mistake, the one born of pure arrogance. He thought my recipes were the prize. He was a manufacturing man. He thought in terms of physical products. But my grandfather had taught me that a recipe itself is devilishly hard to protect legally. Anyone can sell a strawberry jam. The real value wasn't in the list of ingredients. It was in the process, the specific temperature variations, the non-obvious ingredient I used that balanced the acidity, things that were legally defined as trade secrets. And even more valuable than that was the brand itself. The name Josie's Pantry, the story, the trust I had built with customers. That was protectable with a trademark, a fortress I had already started building the day I filed my LLC. Emmett's predatory contract was designed to vacuum up all of it, but its premise was flawed. He was trying to buy the house, but the real value was the land it was built on, and the deed to that land had my name on it. This is where a small, deliberate inaccuracy might be useful for those who want to debate the finer points. You can't exactly patent a jam recipe in the way you can a new machine. It's a messy area of law, but you can build a wall around it with trade secret protections and trademark law so high and so thick that it might as well be a patent. That was my grandfather's philosophy. Use every brick the law gives you. My resolve needed more than just old books. It needed allies. My first and most important ally was already in place. Her name was Maria. She was the first person I ever hired, a young culinary school graduate with more passion than experience. I had taken a chance on her, and she had repaid me with a fierce, unwavering loyalty. She ran my small production kitchen with the precision of a drill sergeant and the heart of an artist. Maria had seen Emmett during his mentorship tours. She'd told me later how he'd walk through her kitchen like he owned it, touching her equipment, questioning her methods, his eyes scanning everything with a cold, acquisitive glint. She hated him on sight. She'd said to me once, "That man doesn't look at your jam, Josie. He looks through it, like he's trying to see the price tag on the other side." I called her, not at work, but on her personal cell, late at night. I told her everything. I didn't have to convince her. I just heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, followed by a low, furious, "I knew it, that son of a bitch." I knew he was a snake. Maria became my eyes and ears. Emmett's people, thinking the deal was all but done, started getting careless. Maria told me how a man from E-Corp's efficiency team had called our main fruit supplier, trying to get a copy of our standing order and pricing structure. My supplier, a farmer I'd had a relationship with for years, had told him to get lost and called me immediately. The attempt was clumsy, arrogant. It was Emmett's way. He didn't persuade, he presumed. My second call was harder. It was to a man named Arthur Vance. He had been my grandfather's law partner for over 40 years. He was semi-retired, a legend in the small, insular world of intellectual property law. I was nervous calling him. To him I was just William's little granddaughter who used to steal his good pens. I explained the situation, my voice trembling at first, then steadying as I laid out the facts, using the language I had absorbed from the books in my basement. I emailed him Emmett's contract. He called me back in less than an hour. His voice was a dry, crackling rasp, but it held the authority of a Supreme Court justice. He said, "Josie, my girl, your grandfather would be immensely proud," and hopping mad. "This document isn't a contract, it's a mugging in legalese." He then said the words that changed everything. He said, "This is an ironclad defense you've built for yourself. What's your offense?" Offense. The word echoed in my head. I had been so focused on protecting what was mine that I hadn't dared to think about going on the attack. Emmett's whole plan, his sudden interest in my company, it felt too specific. A man like him didn't do things without a clear strategic objective. It wasn't just about adding a quaint artisanal brand to his portfolio. There had to be a bigger prize. Maria gave me the final piece of the puzzle. She overheard one of Emmett's lieutenants on the phone in the hallway outside the kitchen. He was complaining, his voice low and angry. He'd said, "I don't know why the old man is so obsessed with this jam company. It's all for that gilded spoon pitch. He thinks having an authentic founder story in his pocket is the magic key to get them to the table." The gilded spoon. It was like a lightning strike. The Gilded Spoon was the fastest growing premium grocery retailer in the country. They were notorious for being selective, for championing small independent brands with compelling stories. They were the holy grail for any company like mine. And for a behemoth like E-Corp, a partnership with them would be a massive PR victory, a way to signal that they were in touch with modern consumer trends. Emmett wasn't trying to steal my company for its revenue. He was trying to steal its soul, to wear my authenticity like a costume, to impress the one client he couldn't bully his way into a meeting with. He wasn't just trying to acquire my business, he was trying to acquire my story. Arthur's question came back to me. "What's your offense?" The answer was suddenly, blindingly clear. It wasn't enough to block his punch. I had to take the prize he was lunging for. He wanted to use my story to get a meeting with the Gilded Spoon. I would go to them myself. I would pitch them not as a potential acquisition target for a soulless conglomerate, but as a partner. I would use the very thing he was trying to steal, my authenticity, my story, my grandfather's legacy, as my primary weapon. He thought he was a grand master playing chess against a novice. He had no idea I was about to flip the whole board over and start a new game with my own rules. The plan felt audacious, terrifying, and absolutely necessary. It wasn't about revenge, I told myself again, the lie becoming thinner, more transparent. It was about defining my own value, in my own terms, before he could put his price tag on it. The quiet nights of research were over. It was time to make some noise. The first move in a silent war has to be just that. Silent. A whisper that only the right people can hear. My offensive began not with a declaration, but with a box. I spent a full day selecting the perfect assortment of my jams. The classic strawberry balsamic that had started it all. The spicy sweet peach habanero that was my personal favorite. The complex and moody fig and black pepper. I packed them myself, nesting the glass jars in recycled crinkle-cut paper inside a simple, elegant black box. There was no flashy marketing material inside, just a single thick card of cream-colored stock. On it I hand-wrote a short note. It wasn't a pitch, it was an introduction. I had done my homework. The head of purchasing and brand curation for the Gilded Spoon was a woman named Carol Sterling. I'd read every interview she'd ever given. She was famous for her no BS approach and her passion for brands with what she called real DNA. She hated corporate schmoozing and was known to throw unsolicited pitch decks in the trash without reading them. She believed that a product should speak for itself first. My note was addressed to her directly. It said, "Dear Miss Sterling, a product story should start on the palate. I hope mine tells you something interesting. Sincerely, Josie." That was it. I included my personal cell phone number at the bottom. I sent the package via a courier that guaranteed hand delivery to her office. Then I waited, and it was the most excruciating wait of my life. Every day that passed felt like a year. Meanwhile, Emmett's mentorship was escalating into outright pressure. He'd call me daily, his voice tight with an impatience he was barely trying to conceal. He'd ask, "Josie, Have you had a chance to look over that paperwork? We need to get the ball rolling. The market doesn't wait. I'd learned to master a tone of polite, apologetic deference. I'd tell him, I'm so sorry, Emmett. Things have been absolutely swamped here. I promise I'll get to it this weekend. Each conversation was a delicate dance on a razor's edge. I had to keep him placated, to keep him believing he was in control, while the clock was ticking on my gambit. Maria was my lifeline. She reported that the atmosphere at my small facility was growing tense. Emmett's people were becoming a fixture, observing operations. One of them had tried to photograph my proprietary cooking process. Maria had accidentally tripped and spilled a gallon of sticky blueberry syrup near his expensive camera. A brilliant, subtle act of sabotage. She was a better soldier than I could have ever hoped for. She was protecting the fortress while I was out trying to conquer new territory. After 10 days of silence, my phone rang. It was an unknown number with a New York area code. My heart leaped into my throat. I answered, my voice hopefully sounding much calmer than I felt. A crisp, professional voice on the other end said, Is this Josie? This is Carol Sterling. My entire world stood still. I just got out of a tasting meeting, she said, without any preamble. We weren't supposed to be tasting your product. My assistant put it in the lineup without telling me. She thought the packaging was intriguing. I was about to be angry at her, until I tasted your fig and black pepper jam. She paused. Who the hell are you? That question was my opening. I didn't talk about revenue projections or market share. I told her my story. I told her about my grandfather and his law books. I told her about starting at a farmer's market with a single card table and a dream. I told her about my commitment to local suppliers and my passion for creating flavors that told a story. I talked for 20 minutes straight, and she didn't interrupt me once. When I finally finished, breathless, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. I thought I had blown it. Then she said, I get 100 pitches a week from companies trying to fake a story like that. Huge conglomerates with marketing departments dedicated to manufacturing authenticity. It has a certain smell to it, a smell of plastic. Your story doesn't have that smell, she continued. I know for a fact that Emmett, the old dinosaur from E Corp, has been trying to get a meeting with me for 6 months. His people have been harassing my office. I had a feeling he was trying to acquire a brand like yours to use as a Trojan horse. Let me guess, he's trying to buy you out. The question hung in the air. I chose my words carefully. I said, He's been mentoring me. Carol let out a sharp, dry laugh. That's what he calls it. Is it? Mentoring. Well, I'd be much more interested in partnering with the person who actually built the company than the one trying to swallow it whole. Can you be in New York on Friday? The meeting in the Gilded Spoon's corporate headquarters was everything Emmett's office was not. It was bright, airy, and full of life. The walls were covered in art made by employees, and the air buzzed with a collaborative energy. Carol Sterling was exactly as I had imagined, sharp, direct, and dressed in a way that was both impeccably stylish and utterly practical. She didn't waste time with small talk. We sat down, and she had my entire product line laid out on the conference table. She had done her research. She knew my sales figures, my distribution network, my press mentions. She asked hard, smart questions for an hour, and I had the answers. I knew my business inside and out, because I had built it with my own 2 hands. At the end of the meeting, she leaned back in her chair and leveled a gaze at me that was both intimidating and deeply validating. She said, We want an exclusive, a full national launch in all 300 of our stores. We'll make Josie's Pantry our flagship brand for the next fiscal year. We'll put your face, your story, on everything. We want to sell authenticity, Josie, and you're the real deal. The deal she offered was staggering. It was more than I had ever dreamed of. It would make my company a national player overnight. It was also the exact prize Emmett had been hunting. I flew home in a daze, the signed letter of intent in my briefcase, feeling like a block of lead. I had done it. I had pulled off a silent, bloodless coup. While Emmett was busy drafting the terms of my surrender, I had captured the entire kingdom. He was still waiting for me to sign his paperwork, completely oblivious to the fact that the game was already over, and I had won. The power shift didn't begin with a confrontation, it began with a press release. I worked closely with Carol Sterling's formidable PR team at the Gilded Spoon. They understood the narrative power of what had just happened. They weren't just announcing a new product line, they were telling a story of David and Goliath, of authenticity versus corporate greed. We crafted the press release with the precision of a surgical strike. It went out to all the major business and food industry publications at 8 a.m. on a Monday morning. The headline was a masterpiece of understated aggression. Artisanal brand Josie's Pantry signs exclusive national deal with the Gilded Spoon, citing importance of founder-led growth. It didn't mention Emmett or E Corp by name, but it didn't have to. The subtext was crystal clear. The body of the article was even more pointed. It included a quote from Carol Sterling saying, "In a market saturated with soulless acquisitions, we are thrilled to partner with a true innovator like Josie. We believe the future of food is in authentic stories, not leveraged buyouts." The real stinger was the quote they asked me for. I thought about it for a long time, choosing every word for maximum impact. I said, "My grandfather, who was a patent attorney, taught me that the most valuable thing you own is your name and your story. I'm honored to have found a partner in the Gilded Spoon who values that as much as I do. My brand is not for sale." I was at my production facility when the press release hit. I didn't have to wait long. At 8:15 a.m., my phone began to vibrate. It was Emmett. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again and again. On the fifth try, I answered, putting the phone on speaker for Maria to hear. His voice was no longer the smooth, condescending purr I was used to. It was a raw, strangled roar. "What the hell did you do?" I kept my own voice calm, almost detached. I said, "Good morning, Emmett. I'm a little busy right now. Is this about the partnership agreement? I'm afraid I'm going to have to decline your generous offer." There was a sputtering sound on the other end of the line. "A deal with the Gilded Spoon, an exclusive. I was going to bring you into that deal, Josie. I was going to give you that opportunity." I almost laughed. I replied, "No, Emmett. You were going to use me. You were going to gut my company and wear my story like a cheap suit. You didn't see a partner. You saw an asset, and you miscalculated its value." He switched tactics instantly, the rage turning into the cold threat of a cornered animal. "You'll be hearing from my lawyers. You have no idea who you're messing with. I have contracts with you. You've been using my mentorship, my resources." The lie was so audacious it was almost impressive. I said, "Your mentorship? Emmett, the only thing you taught me is that I should have read the fine print sooner. And as for your lawyers, they're welcome to contact mine. I have my grandfather's old partner, Arthur Vance, on retainer. I believe you know him." The silence that followed was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. Arthur Vance was a legend, a shark from Emmett's own generation. Threatening me was one thing. Threatening to go to war with Arthur Vance was another. The bully had just run into a bigger bully, and all his bluster evaporated. The call ended with a click. Then came the desperate counter. Less than an hour later, Mark called me. He sounded frantic. "Joe, Dad is losing his mind. He's willing to make a new offer. A real one. He'll buy the company for $10 million. He'll make you the president of the whole gourmet division. He'll give you anything you want. You just have to back out of the Gilded Spoon deal." I listened patiently. Mark was, as always, trying to be the peacemaker, trying to smooth things over and make the problem go away. He didn't understand that the problem wasn't the deal. It was his father. I told him, "Mark, it was never about the money. It was about the respect. Your father tried to steal my life's work from me. He tried to do it from my own husband's family. There is no amount of money that can fix that. Please, tell him not to call me again. I have a launch to plan." The power had shifted, completely and irrevocably. It wasn't just that I had the bigger deal. It was that I had seized control of the narrative. In the world of business, perception is reality. The press release had painted me as the authentic, independent founder who had chosen a principled partner. By extension, it painted Emmett as the spurned corporate raider. He hadn't just lost a deal. He had lost face. And for a man whose entire identity was built on an image of invincible power, that was a mortal wound. He had tried to steal my company in silence, and in return I had orchestrated his humiliation in public. And the most delicious part of it all, I hadn't lied once. I had simply told the truth, at the right time, to the right people. The final confrontation wasn't a shouting match in a boardroom. It was, fittingly, at a family dinner. It was a Sunday, 3 weeks after the press release. The air in Emmett's grand dining room was thick with a silence, so heavy it felt like you could cut it with a steak knife. Mark sat beside me, a nervous wreck, picking at his food. Emmett's wife, a woman who had long ago learned that survival meant staying silent, kept her eyes fixed on her plate. Emmett himself was a thundercloud in a bespoke suit, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. He had tried to pretend nothing had happened. He'd tried to carry on with the usual pompous pronouncements about the stock market and global politics, but no one was biting. The power dynamic in the room had been fundamentally altered. He was no longer the sun around which the rest of us orbited. He was a dying star, his gravitational pull failing. Finally, he couldn't stand it anymore. He needed to reassert his dominance, to reclaim the narrative in the one place he still could, his own home. He lifted his crystal glass of wine, the familiar gesture now feeling hollow and theatrical. He looked directly at me, a flicker of the old condescension in his eyes. He said, "Well, let's all raise a glass to Josie. It seems my mentorship paid off even more than I expected. Congratulations on your deal." The entire table froze. Everyone looked at me, waiting for my reaction. They expected me to be gracious, to accept the olive branch, to play my part in the family fiction that he had, in some way, helped me. In the past I would have swallowed my anger and my pride, and given him the victory he so desperately needed. But I was no longer that person. I had been forged into something harder in the fire of his betrayal. I didn't raise my glass. I placed my fork and knife neatly on my plate, creating a soft clink that echoed in the silent room. I met his gaze, my own calm and steady. I let the silence stretch, making him wait. Finally, I said, "Thank you, Emmett. That's very kind of you. And speaking of your mentorship, I've been meaning to ask you something." I leaned forward slightly. "A reporter from the Business Chronicle called me last week. She's doing a larger profile piece on the Gilded Spoon, and she's particularly interested in stories about their work with female entrepreneurs. She asked me to comment on your methods for mentoring women in business." I told her I wasn't sure how to answer. I told her I'd have to get back to her. The color drained from Emmett's face. It was magnificent. The mask of control shattered, revealing the panicked, insecure man beneath. He understood the threat immediately. It was one thing to be outmaneuvered in a business deal. It was another thing entirely to be publicly exposed as a predator who specifically targets women. I hadn't actually spoken to a reporter about that, not yet. But the possibility, the loaded gun I had just placed on the table was enough. I had shown him that I had a second barrel, and this one was aimed directly at his public reputation, the only thing he cared about more than money. I held his legacy in my hands, and he knew it. He said nothing. He just stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. For the first time in his life, Emmett was speechless. I had taken his power, his prize, and now his voice. I didn't push it. I didn't need to. I had made my point. I simply picked up my wine glass and took a slow, deliberate sip. The rest of the dinner passed in absolute silence. It was the most peaceful family meal I'd ever had. I never did call that reporter back with the full story. It wasn't about revenge, I told myself, and for the first time it almost felt true. It wasn't necessary. The threat was enough to guarantee he would never ever cross my path again. The news of his downfall came a few months later, not in a dramatic headline, but in a quiet trickle of information from Mark. The board of E Corp had been concerned about the public failure of the Gilded Spoon initiative. They were troubled by the narrative that had emerged. Emmett was asked to step back from his role in new acquisitions. He was being quietly, politely, and ruthlessly put out to pasture. His own company, the empire he had built, had cut him out like a liability. It was a death by 1,000 corporate memos, a quiet execution he had no power to stop. My vindication came not in his failure, but in my success. The launch of Josie's Pantry in the Gilded Spoon was a phenomenon. My story, our story, resonated with people. We couldn't make the jam fast enough. I stood at the grand opening event in their New York flagship store, watching customers fill their baskets with my products, my face smiling back at them from posters and displays. Maria was by my side, no longer just my kitchen manager, but my vice president of operations. She was beaming. Mark was there too. He stood a little off to the side, watching me with a look of awe, pride, and a deep, humbling regret. Our relationship was still a work in progress, a complicated landscape we were navigating one day at a time. But in that moment, seeing my name in lights, seeing the tangible proof of what I had built, not just by surviving, but by fighting back, I felt a sense of peace that was more profound than any victory. I hadn't just saved my company, I had reclaimed my name. So here I am now. I'm speaking to you from my new office, which is 5 times the size of my old one, and has a window that looks out over the city. On the wall behind me, there are 2 framed objects. One is a photograph of my grandfather, William, his kind eyes smiling from behind his spectacles. The other is the predatory contract that Emmett sent me. I framed it as a reminder that the greatest risks often come disguised as opportunities, and that the most important thing you can ever do is read the fine print. This whole journey, it was never really about the jam, and in the end, it wasn't even about the revenge, as satisfying as it was. It was about refusing to be a footnote in someone else's story. It was about refusing to let someone else define your value. Emmett's mistake was thinking my company was a little hobby. A person's passion is never little. It's the biggest and most powerful thing they have. It's their engine, their armor, and when necessary, their weapon. I'm telling you this story because I know I'm not the only one who has faced a version of this. I know there are so many of you out there who have been underestimated, belittled, or had your work dismissed by someone who holds power over you. You've been told your dream is unrealistic, your passion is a distraction, your ambition is unseemly. You've been patted on the head and told to be patient. My story is proof that the game is not always fixed. The person who understands the rules, who has the courage to write their own, can still win. Your knowledge is your leverage, your integrity is your brand, and your story, the real, authentic story of who you are and what you've built, is your greatest asset. Don't ever let anyone steal it from you. Don't ever let them convince you it's for sale. If any part of my story resonated with you, if you've ever felt overlooked or undervalued, please let me know in the comments below. It truly helps to know that we're not alone in these fights. Your stories give me strength, and I hope mine gives you a little bit too. And if you want to hear more stories about turning the tables and building your own reality, make sure you like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and hit that subscribe button and the notification bell, because your own story is waiting to be written, and you are the only person who should be holding the pen.